Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. Our guest this week is Erin Hughes, the co-founder and executive director of Solidarity Engineering. Erin, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been so excited ever since we met to have this conversation. We've been covering sort of a lot of the big political issues this year on the show in light of the election coming up in now not that many months. And we've sort of started covering immigration, talking with an expert focused on sort of the legal immigration landscape. But we haven't delved into the border. And I think this is a perfect way to start that conversation because you're not engaged in the border from a political standpoint, but from a humanitarian one. So I think this is a perfect place. And I'd love to just start with, tell me more about Solidarity Engineering. What are you all up to?
Yes. So Solidarity Engineering, we started in 2020 as a response to the migrant protection protocols, or also known as like the Remain in Mexico policy. So our mission is to provide community-driven, public health-focused engineering for people in crisis. So what that means in the border context is that we provide water, drinking water, clean drinking water, sanitary bathroom facilities, functional showers. We also do, so that's kind of in the WASH realm. That's in humanitarian engineering. That's called WASH. And then we also we've kind of expanded to infrastructure and playgrounds, shades, shelter type stuff. And then our third kind of pillar in Solidarity is data-driven advocacy work. So a lot of our work is a response to community requests and community feedback. So that essentially means that we go out into the community, we survey the community, we make sure what we're doing is wanted and necessary. And we talk to folks about how we can improve, what else they need, and we kind of go from there.
That's amazing. So a bunch of follow-up questions on the waterfront or on the WASH stuff. Describe for me, well, like what are conditions like before Solidarity Engineering gets involved in one of these border camps? And maybe even describe a little bit, just give context of like, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about a border camp?
Yeah. So actually, a lot of Americans aren't even aware that there are, makeshift refugee camps right at our southern border. So essentially what happens is a lot of the asylum seekers and refugees come up through Mexico, and they get stuck right at our border because they're waiting for their asylum case to be heard in a US court, which means that they are stuck living in these encampments in Mexico. So most of the time, these people have been extorted, and they're out of money, and they're waiting for weeks, months, years, and they end up accumulating in these very makeshift refugee camps where the UN is not involved. Most of the support comes from smaller grassroots organizations, and the conditions are really terrible. So before Solidarity Engineering got involved, and before we kind of started our work, we had heard about the conditions in some of these camps. And specifically, on one podcast, we had heard a nurse volunteer. She was volunteering in one of these camps, and she was getting really flustered and frustrated that all of the asylum seekers were kept getting sick with preventable waterborne illnesses. So they were drinking from the Rio Grande, and then they were resorting to open defecation right next to the Rio Grande. And so these people were coming to her clinic with pink eye and skin infections and gastrointestinal infections, diarrhea, dysentery, which in this day and age, it's kind of crazy that people are getting really sick with dysentery right at the US border. So when I had heard of these conditions, at the time I was working for the Philadelphia Water Department, and I was like, I know how to help. I know what to do in this situation. I know how to filter water. And, myself and my two other co-founders decided to go down. We didn't know each other at this point. We actually met at the border to go down and attempt to help out with some of these issues.
And on the camps, like how many of these camps exist right now?
So there are are quite a few camps and shelters and kind of makeshift, kind of established areas where these asylum seekers end up living. And so there are probably a few we work in two Mexican cities, Matamoros and Reynosa. But I mean, they happen all along the border. But our general work is in Reynosa for the most part right now, but we had been working in Matamoros for a long time. And there are thousands of asylum seekers living in some of the camps get up to 3,000 people. Some of them are smaller, 20 to 40 people. So Solidarity Engineering, we work through the whole gambit. So, we'll work at Senda de Vida 2, which is can get up to 3,000 people. And then we'll also help out at Casa Lulu, which is mostly for like vulnerable women, and that maybe has space for 20 to 40 people.
Right. And these camps basically exist all across the American southern border.
Yeah, they're all, some of we primarily are in those two cities, but there are camps in Juarez, in Tijuana, and Solidarity Engineering. We are in communication with a lot of these smaller grassroots NGOs that work in these cities as a response to this asylum seeker crisis.
Are there estimates of like at any moment in time the raw number of individuals across all the camps? Like, do you have that number?
So last year it was estimated 10,000 people just in the city of Reynosa. And I haven't seen any like real great accurate estimates. The Mexican government sometimes comes out with estimates, but they'll say like a few thousand, and I know for a fact that there's more than a few thousand in just the camps that we work at. So I mean, it's hard to estimate, and not even the government or the UN can really do it super accurately.
Right, which makes part of the reason that this issue has so much sort of energy around it is that you can't trust the data. Everyone's reporting on it. Yeah, everyone's reporting on it based on their own kind of view. And you're someone who's been down there now for quite some time. So just rewinding the clock, like these camps on the Mexico side of the border, did they come into being specifically as a result of former President Trump's Remain in Mexico stance? Or were they always there and they just happened to be smaller before the change in policy under the Trump administration? Or were they brand new?
So actually, one of the camps that we work at, Senda One, it's a church, and it was they had maybe like one dorm building, and 10 years ago it was for migrant workers that would come to the United States for like growing season, and they would essentially just like wait at that shelter for like a few days while they kind of got their paperwork in order. And so some of these camps and shelters had kind of a basis for doing this, but now since 20 and the Remain in Mexico policy took effect, where these are asylum seekers, these are refugees, they come from all over the globe. We have people from Haiti, Venezuela, Ukraine, Russia, China, El Salvador, Colombia. There are people from all over that and I'm not entirely sure exactly why, but I assume that it has to do with visa restrictions and how they travel through South America or Central America, that they essentially have to travel up through Mexico instead of being able to fly directly into the United States. So I mean, all of this kind of came to a head during the Remain in Mexico policy taking effect, and that's kind of when people would travel up. Previously, they would be allowed to cross into the United States, stay with their sponsor. That's the other thing, is that all of these people have sponsors waiting for them in the United States, right? They're proper asylum seekers. They all have a brother in Wisconsin or a sister-in-law in South Carolina, like waiting to host them. And then they essentially get stuck right at the border. And then all of these Texas border towns are really inundated with these asylum cases, which then puts a huge wait list on these folks to actually get seen by a court.
Yeah. Actually, when we had Jack Malday on, who's an immigration expert, but specifically targeting, not border security, but legal immigration. and he works for
Amazing.
a cool think tank called the Mess It Up, but it's called the Bipartisan Research Center, I believe is what it's called. But
Okay.
he mentioned that in our conversation. He said that part of the problem with the asylum cases in particular is that there's a humongous need for administrative workers and administrative legal officials to come in and process these cases. And one of the big pieces of misinformation about asylum, which is what you just brought up, is that in every case they have to have a sponsor. You
Hmm.
can't just show up and, well, I guess you probably could just show up and say that you have asylum, but that's not what we're
Yeah.
talking about here. Yeah.
You can, there is a program that Americans can sign up for, and you can volunteer to be a sponsor to any asylum seeker that doesn't have one. Because it really is, that's the other thing, is once these people do cross into the United States, our systems are so different from what they're used to. And so they do need a lot of help. So, they have to apply for their work visa. So even if they do get granted asylum, now they have to go through the process of getting their work visa, which a lot of people, if you don't speak English, now this is another hurdle to overcome. And you have to figure out a place to live. You have to figure out how to open a bank account. You have to figure out how to transport yourself from your home to your job. Yeah, so there's so much for these people to learn, and that's another huge issue, that once folks get to the United States, we just don't have the systems in place to help them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So in the places where you all are working now, like let's take Matamoros, are there corresponding camps on the US side of the border? Or are these all in Mexico?
They're all in Mexico. There are a few, not temporary shelters, but shelters on the U.S. side that essentially, when the asylum seekers are able to cross into the United States, there are a few kind of church-run shelters that folks can stay in for a night or two while they kind of get their bearings and get themselves a plane ticket or a bus ticket to where they want to go. But they're really not staying at those shelters for very long. It's very transitional.
For too long. Okay. So back to thanks for answering that. I just wanted to give everyone the lay of the land about what these camps are, what they're not. So in the work that you're doing with Solidarity Engineering, essentially you come in and install water purification systems and proper places to go to the bathroom. How long have you been at it, and what kind of results are you seeing?
So we partner with some healthcare provider NGOs. So one of our partners is Doctors Without Borders, or we've also worked with Global Response Management, Global Response Medicine, rather. And those two organizations are specifically there to monitor people's health and help them out. And so working alongside them, we're able to really pinpoint where our projects are necessary. So, if Medicos Sin Fronteras, Doctors Without Borders, comes to us and they're like, well, the Rio camp in Reynosa we are having an outbreak of pink eye, or diarrheal cases. And so we will go there, we'll do an assessment, and we're like, all right, we need to figure out the water filtration system here. We need to provide proper bathroom facilities. And so then next month when we meet with Doctors Without Borders again, and they can tell us directly, like, all right, our diarrheal cases has dropped significantly since porta potties at this location, it's really cool to get that feedback, like,
Yeah.
in kind of immediate sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure it's pretty darn immediate. Like, if you
Yeah,
start cleaning water and providing a proper place for someone to go to the bathroom, it's got to happen fast, because that you
yeah,
just clean it right up and it can't spread anymore. And
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. We see immediate results. And additionally, being such a small organization, we only have 7 staff members, and then probably another 5 to 10 serious volunteers that help us. We can make these really quick decisions. We don't have a lot of red tape that a lot of the bigger NGOs have. So if we hear about a need, we can either look at our existing grant funding, or we can reach out to potential funders and be like, hey, like, we need to respond to this really soon. What do you think? And it really allows us to make these decisions and get out there, for that example with the porta potties at the Rio camp, we heard about it one day, I think maybe on Monday, and then Wednesday we had porta potties out there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, for listeners who are interested in supporting this kind of work, the other cool thing about it is that it's, in the grand scheme of humanitarian aid, it's relatively low dollar to like install like proper porta potties. For example, porta potties are not expensive, and water treatment can be expensive, but you can kind of, nowadays with technology, it's something your dollars can go a long way, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then additionally, so the wash side of things is you see these immediate results, but then we also, some of my favorite projects have been our playgrounds, which as an engineer, it's really easy for me to get caught up in kind of the boring human needs. We need clean drinking water and we need a sanitary place to go to the bathroom. But then you get to do these really fun projects where you see that over half of the population is children. So that's a really interesting statistic. And with kids need more than clean water and a sanitary place to go to the bathroom. They need a place to play and be kids and explore. And so we've been doing a few playground projects, and we're about to start another one. And just seeing these kids, thousands of kids, right, that live at these camps, see that we are building something for them. And when they actually get to start playing on it, it's really incredible. So we've been building playgrounds, and then additionally, our team is a bunch of engineers, so we love STEM. So we've been doing biweekly STEM classes for the kids, which they just love, and it's really one of our favorite projects to do as a team. So
Yeah, I can imagine. What's the average length of stay? It sounds like these populations fluctuate, right? So like, let's say you end up there. How long are you staying there, and how quickly do these things turn over to a new group of people?
So it totally depends where you're coming from. So the Ukrainians, for example, will only stay maybe like a few days, few weeks, versus the folks from El Salvador or Honduras will come and they might have to stay there for a few months or years. Even Haitians are there for, I think the average stay for any of the Haitians are between like 4 and 7 months, something like that. So they really do. I just, if you think about it, for like the Haitians, you've escaped this really terrible environment at home. You've traveled with your family, a lot of times like through the Darien Gap, which if you've heard about the Darien Gap, that is its own nightmare. And now you're stuck in this tent with your kids for months in this place that you don't know Spanish. You're trying your best. There's racism against you. There's all of this stuff that are just consistently working against you. So the tenacity of the people that we work with is just incredible, what they've gone through, and the fact that they are still fighting for a better life.
Yeah. What are the numbers, if you know them, around Chinese or Indian asylum seekers?
We have seen a really big... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
Oh, just that we have seen a big influx in Chinese asylum seekers recently. And it's always interesting because when you see a big population, you kind of like go back through Google and you're like, what happened, in China or obviously Ukraine and obviously Haiti. But it's really interesting to see something happen politically in a place and then a few months later see an influx of asylum seekers. So
yeah, and it's just listening to the numbers that you shared around the length of stay, without casting blame on anyone, it's that data in and of itself tells an interesting story about sort of where America stands, where its priorities are. And yeah, because if it's a matter of processing through administrative law cases, like there should be no difference really, but it sounds like there is.
You'd have to talk back with that lawyer, but yeah, I'm under the impression that, and I'm in no way like associated with any law degree or anything, but I'm under the impression that the United States can take in a certain amount of people from a certain country. So I think maybe that has something to do with it, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, he did mention that there were numbers, like I guess they're quota numbers, for lack of a better way, and they were established a very long time ago. The numbers sometimes get adjusted, if there's like a geopolitical event like Ukraine.
Right.
But it's been a long time since sort of the baseline numbers got adjusted, is what I remember from that conversation.
Yeah. And what else is interesting is that so the UN definition of a refugee is really limited in scope versus a lot of these people, I believe that we need to expand, with new conflicts, we really need to reevaluate who we're calling asylum seekers, who we're calling refugees, who we're calling migrants, because the terminology matters, right? When I use the term migrant, that makes you feel a certain way versus when I call someone a refugee. And, these people are fleeing gang violence, or, a lot has to do with like cartels, a lot has to do with climate change, if their crops, if their land was destroyed because of some catastrophic event caused by climate change, we need to be including these people in under the refugee umbrella. So that's also just kind of something, just an interesting thing to think about, is what we're calling these folks and what that emotes in each of us.
Yeah. The words we use are so important. And we're dealing with human beings. There's this clip going around the internet of former President Trump calling people animals and talking about how Nancy Pelosi told him not to call them animals, and he said they are animals. It's a wild quote, but that's sort of one extreme. And
Yeah.
the point that you're making is a more nuanced point, but it's the same effect. It's like there's a difference between a migrant and an illegal, or
Yeah.
an asylum seeker and a refugee. It's very, and it's such a emotional and now politically polarized issue that it's even more important to get the terms.
Yeah. And redefine some of the terms, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to talk to you about conditions down there, because I feel like people are going to be super interested in that. And it's an important story that Americans need to understand. But before I do that, I want to ask you, where did this come from? Because it strikes me, listening to your story and when we met a month or two ago, that, you're a young woman, mom, going down to an incredibly dangerous part of the world. And it's a courageous act and a selfless act. And I'm just curious why you did it and where that spirit came from.
Yeah. So in 2020, when I had heard about the migrant protection protocols, and just the Remain in Mexico situation, and then hearing that podcast of that nurse talking about the conditions and talking about something that I could help with, I was so frustrated at that point with like the political climate, and I was just done protesting, and I was done going to rallies and feeling like my voice wasn't being heard. It was just, I kind of had like reached my limit. And so when I reached out to that organization, the nurse volunteer, they told me essentially like, look, like there's no engineers here. We are a medical group, but we could really use some engineers down here. And so when they told me that, I was like, all right, let's go. And I was newly married, and I asked my partner, I was like, look, like, thoughts on me quitting my job and us moving into a van and going down to the border? And he was super supportive. And it was right at the beginning of COVID. So we're like driving down to the border and cities are just closing behind us because of COVID. And we got down to the camp and yeah, just started working. I met my two other co-founders down there a few months later. They came, had a really different COVID experience than most people, because I really wasn't quarantining. I was out at the camps helping with their water filtration, helping with stormwater management, the playgrounds stuff. So yeah, definitely a very different COVID experience.
Did they have any COVID outbreaks while you were there in the camps?
We didn't, thank God.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, we were preparing for it. Actually, one of the groups that we were partnering with, Global Response Medicine, they actually got a huge field hospital out at one of the camps, and we helped set it up and everything, and we were really preparing for an outbreak because everyone kind of like is living right on top of each other at these camps. And we were expecting the worst, and a lot of folks, they they would get, they were getting symptoms, and they didn't want to be sent to this field hospital. It was kind of off to the edge of the camp. It was really vulnerable to the cartel, and so I do believe that a lot of folks experienced COVID and didn't really come forward to volunteer to be isolated.
Yeah. I feel like people in China were probably doing that too. Like, no one wants to get sent to whatever hospital they got set up there.
Yeah,
Probably similar experience. So,
yeah.
what about your upbringing though? Back to the origin. What about your upbringing, your belief system would cause you to do such a thing? It's an incredible story, and I don't think we're going to get into it. I don't think people understand, like, these places are dangerous. They're dangerous for the
Yeah,
workers. They're dangerous for the people who are sitting in these camps. So what about your upbringing? Anything with your parents, or is it just how you're made?
I don't know. That's an interesting question because, yeah, where we work in the cities of Matamoros and Reynosa, it's in the state of Tamaulipas of Mexico. Tamaulipas is a category 4, I want to say, do not travel, which at the time that we went down there in 2020 and 2021, that was the same category as Syria. So it was like the US State Department was like, don't go there. In particular, the cities of Matamoros and Reynosa are absolutely cartel controlled. We have to deal with the cartel a lot in our work. So it's dangerous. And I'm recently a new mom. So it's definitely something that I need to start considering a little bit more. But as far as my upbringing, I grew up in New Jersey. And I'm the youngest of three girls. And I think kind of all of us, me and my sisters, we're all, adventurers. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty stubborn. So I think that played a big role. Is I can get really frustrated and just need to do something. And that's
Yeah.
kind of, I hit my breaking point and needed to do something about this frustration.
Well, wherever it came from, it's inspiring, and appreciate it. We need more Americans like you. So thanks for the work that you're doing. I want to talk. Let's talk about the conditions that you're seeing, because you have like a really unique insight. So I want to start with, I guess, one of the more of a political question, but I'm just curious about your anecdotal opinion about the reporting that's happening. So basically, if you're like me and you live in West Hollywood, you're hearing, and you click open any standard news source, it sounds like they're calling it an invasion. And they show these videos on Twitter. There's people everywhere. What does it really look like down there on a day-to-day basis? Are you seeing like active signs of people crossing the border? Like, what does it feel like when you're there?
So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that all of these people that we're helping, they're proper asylum seekers, right? They want to enter the United States through the proper protocols, right? And actually be here legally. And so what ends up happening is you have all of these people and they're just like waiting there. And actually, I'm glad that you brought this up, because just recently, one of our partner organizations, the Resource Center of Matamoros, RCM, had a few volunteers who came, and they were part of some right-wing media group. They put together fake flyers essentially saying that RCM is passing out these flyers, like, telling the migrants that once they cross into the United States to vote for Biden, which it's just ridiculous. And now this is being retweeted by right-wing politicians, and it's absolutely not. First of all, it's not the truth. None of the NGOs down there would hand out flyers like that, first of all. And second of all, now we have to really vet our volunteers so much harder and make sure that they're actually here for the right reasons and they're not going to, trick us, which is just so ridiculous
Yeah.
that we
So
know about this.
So in this case, a group of right wing activists went down to try to make the NGO look bad, basically make the
Yeah,
NGO look like it's encouraging people to come to the United States and vote for Biden, by the way, which they can't do unless they become citizens.
exactly.
Yeah.
They can't even vote. So it's just propaganda. It's just to try and villainize these asylum seekers, these refugees. It's really frustrating to see, and these people just don't deserve it. They've been through so much, and that now they're stuck in these shelters and camps where they're already super vulnerable to the cartel. All of them have stories of kidnapping and rape, and it's just mind-blowing what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And now on top of it, we're calling them, murderers and rapists, and they don't do that.
Let's talk about the cartel for a second, because it sounds like, from this conversation, also from the one we had before, it sounds like the cartels are very involved. They're around, but they're in the whole process. Like, let's say someone goes up all the way from South America. The cartels are there the whole time, extorting people. It sounds like raping people. Like, what are you hearing on the ground or seeing on the ground about their activities, the criminal activities in this vulnerable population?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, everyone at these camps have some sort of kidnapping story, rape story where they've experienced. And it's just because they're so vulnerable. The Mexican government doesn't help them. And in addition, if you're in Reynosa and you call a Reynosa cop to help you, a lot of times they're also connected. So it makes it really hard to get any sort of justice. So Solidarity Engineering, we've been in a situation where our team has been threatened by the cartel before, and what ended up happening was that we essentially had to meet with some of these members and be like, look, we're just providing. At the time, we were installing a drainage pipe, and so we had to kind of show them what we were doing and why we were there. And after that, it was a lot better, and we were able to work with them a little bit better. But yeah, they're there, and they're just kind of folks that you have to deal with and that you have to work around, and you have to accommodate them.
Are they like walking around the camps, like trying to sell drugs? Do they mess with people as they're in the camp, or is it more kind of when they're on the road?
So they have absolutely infiltrated the camps, and camp managers, so the owners of the land or the church groups that run these camps, they do their best to vet their workers and us as well. But it is really hard to make sure that that these kind of dangerous actors don't get involved. And the asylum seekers are kind of their bread and butter in this region. So the cartel knows that the asylum seekers have sponsors in the United States, right? So they know that someone has money associated with these people. So kidnapping them is lucrative. And so, a lot of these people will be kidnapped, and then they'll reach out to their American sponsor, their American brother, sister-in-law, whatever, to kind of pay them off. And that's a lot of what happens. And it's really heartbreaking. And then additionally, when folks are coming up from South America, they send a lot of times if they ride a train or a bus or something, they kind of have to pay a tax to some folks who will maybe board the bus and collect money from everyone. I've heard a lot of stories of folks passing through the Darien Gap, which is the jungle between Colombia and Panama, and the guides there who bring folks through that jungle, a lot of that is cartel, and they have to essentially pay these guides to get them through safely. So it's all connected, and it's really disheartening to see these folks deal with this on a day-to-day basis. It's scary, right? I don't think it's ever gotten normalized for them.
Yeah. And I think it's very hard to, if you're living safely in a United States city, to put yourself in the mindset of like, you know what, I'm going to take my family, because many people are traveling with their children, and expose them to this 1,000-mile journey or whatever it is. I don't know how many miles it is, but it's really far. And knowing that I'm going to deal with cartel people and have to walk through the jungle and this and that, and then end up in a camp that there was before groups like you all got involved, there was no guarantee that there was going to be clean facilities or anything. It's just like, it gives you really a lot of perspective about what it's like to live in this planet. Like, some people just really are in a bad strait, and they're willing to risk everything to correct that.
That's the thing, is that no one wants to leave their home and their community their family. And so it just goes to show, it's not, these people aren't going into this journey totally naive. They're aware of the dangers, and the fact that they are leaving their homes and leaving their communities just goes to show how terrible their current situations are, right? That they would risk their health and their safety and their time and their jobs for a chance to get to the United States for a better life. That's one thing to really think about, like where would your breaking point be? Right? Think about like what would the conditions need to be that would force you to uproot your family and take them on this really treacherous journey for just a chance at a better life. And these folks have, they're not taking this decision lightly. So I think that's one thing that Americans just need to think about is, these people aren't leaving because of a minor hiccup. Their lives are at stake, and that's kind of where they're at.
Yeah. It's sobering. They're willing to risk it all, right? Like I was listening to, I forget the podcast, but it was two Navy SEALs or Green Berets. They may have been Green Berets, but they were talking about the Darien Gap. And the guest had just gotten back from the Darien Gap, and he was asking the host, like, "Oh, you want to come down?" And he had just had a kid. He's like, "I'm not going down there." So to give you a sense, like if Navy SEALs are like hesitating about like heading
Yeah.
down there to do humanitarian work, it's dangerous. So I remember in our first conversation, some stories that you had told about some work you're doing on the Darien Gap. So why don't we talk about that for a second? Because I think it kind of relates to one of the things you're working on. Maybe not right now, but it's a future plan. So what are you trying to do with the Darien Gap?
So we don't have a project there right now, but we are chatting with some partners to potentially go down and help prep some of the asylum seekers for their journey through the jungle. By the time folks get to Reynosa and Matamoros, if you ask them like what was the worst part of your journey, I think every single person that I've asked has said the Darien Gap.
Wow.
And and they have these just horrific stories of traveling through the jungle, and you have to carry your own water, but if you have a backpack or a child or someone else that you're traveling with and you can't carry all of your clean water with you, you resort to drinking from streams and puddles, which then you get sick, which then you end up being slower on the trail, and maybe your group leaves you behind, which is a very real risk to these people. And I had one woman tell me that she had to like climb over dead bodies at some point, like going through the Darien Gap, which just gives me chills thinking about. And so our initiative down there would be, and I'm still kind of in the planning stages, talking to partners, trying to figure out the logistics of something like this because it is so dangerous. But essentially we would want to go partner with LifeStraw. Actually, LifeStraw has agreed to donate a ton of their camping straws, which essentially you can drink straight out of a river or a pond, and it gets rid of like something crazy like 99% of bacteria and viruses and protozoa. And so folks can drink the water and they won't get sick. And then additionally, we would not just distribute those to the asylum seekers, but just hygiene kits in general. So another big issue that makes you really sick is if you can't wash your hands. So with hand sanitizer, with soap, with menstrual products, with condoms, that's another big thing, is that a lot of times these women will get raped and end up, we see them in Reynosa and Matamoros, and they might have an STD or they might be pregnant. So having even just like condoms in this hygiene kit might help. So that's kind of what we had been thinking about, is putting together these kits, and that could potentially help folks survive through the gap and on their journey.
And how do you know how long it is and how long it usually takes? Like how many miles is this jungle walk?
That's a good question. At one point I did know, but it takes like a few days.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
like you're kind of out in the wilderness with like nothing for several days.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
days, weeks. Yeah. So
Yep.
it's not like a month long thing, but it definitely can take like a week or more. So.
Yeah. It sounds kind of crazy.
Yeah. And on top of that, you know, some humanitarian aid organizations do hesitate to go there because it is so dangerous to even be on the Columbia side of the jungle distributing anything, because the folks that are guiding the asylum seekers through the jungle are typically cartel related. So that adds a whole nother complication.
Yeah, it's like these criminal enterprises are controlling this entire pipeline essentially. Whether
Yeah.
you're an asylum seeker or not, anyone who's attempting to sort of walk to America is going to run into this group
Yeah.
and have to reckon with it. Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah, exactly.
What about before we move on? What about sort of conditions on the U.S. cities on the other side of these camps? So, like on the other side of Matamoros, there's a U.S. city. Are you seeing signs of this, quote unquote, invasion of people coming over to the United States illegally? Like, or do you see, like, are these videos that are circulating on X of masses of people like breaking through fences and stuff? Like, is that happening, or is that just like fake news?
I mean, I don't see it. And typically the Americans on Solidarity Engineering's team, we typically stay on the Texas side of the border. So we'll stay in like McAllen or Hidalgo or Brownsville. And then we essentially just like commute into Matamoros and Reynosa every day. And we meet up with our Mexican field team. And I've literally never seen anyone crossing the border illegally. I've never seen any, even in like McAllen and Hidalgo, like I've never talked to anyone who has experienced like the huge mass of people. Recently, they've been getting annoyed at like these right-wing groups that are coming in and making the hotel prices increase, actually. So
Yeah,
you
these
have
like
these right wing,
vigilante
yeah,
vigilante groups like, I'm going to stop the crossings of the border. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all that. I know it's kind of like a dark subject, but I think that people need to understand, and the more I think we can talk about what's actually happening, the better our policy response is going to be. So I want to sort of end this conversation by just kind of picking your brain about policy. Putting aside the humanitarian work that you're doing, do you think there's some no-brainer, or whether or not they're no-brainer, what are the policy changes do you think would help this situation at the border?
So first, I mean, I do think that these people are becoming victims of organized crime in the cartels because of the length of their stay at these camps in Mexico. So kind of we just need to revamp the asylum process in the United States. And I think, before Trump took office and before, actually, probably even before Obama, our asylum process was a lot easier to navigate, where people would come, they present themselves at the border, and then, they would just have to prove that they had a sponsor, and essentially they would be allowed into the United States. They would be allowed to go live in relative safety with their sponsor, with their family. And while that was happening, that's when they would start the asylum process. But they could start the asylum process from a place of safety, not a place of living in a tent with your whole family in the heat, being kidnapped or under the threat of kidnapping. So I think, number one, we just need to allow folks to do their asylum paperwork and documentation and court proceedings from the United States. I've been asked before, like, what would be the ideal situation for Solidarity Engineering? And honestly, if Solidarity Engineering could dissolve and not exist, right? Like, if these camps weren't a thing anymore, that would be incredible. But until that happens, we will remain there, and we will remain providing them with the very basics of clean water and a bathroom and a play space for kids. So
Yeah. It seems like with this asylum question that there are some practical policy solutions that may not even really be controversial. Like there may be bipartisan support for that, right? Because it's not like we're advocating for changing the quota numbers. It's more just like, why don't we process these in a more humanitarian fashion and invest in whatever administrative and legal resources that we need? Why don't we just invest in those so that we can process these cases faster and prevent
Exactly.
people from sitting in limbo for too long? Because when they're in limbo, they can't really become productive members of our society anyways and start paying taxes and all the things that we want them to do. So to me,
Exactly.
yeah, it seems like there is a proactive, progressive policy that we could push for in this
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Biden has been just, throwing money into the Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, and Trump did the same before him. There's so much money going into the wrong things. The border wall and more guns and trucks and officers, when in reality, if we kind of shifted our focus and shifted that money into social workers and lawyers and people to actually properly interview the asylum seekers, right? To make sure that they're actually asylum seekers. If that's, what some of these right wingers are worried about, is that, oh, these folks are coming and they're not proper asylum seekers. Well, all right, let's, instead of paying for more of this wall or more of these officers that are patrolling the border, that are putting up barbed wire, that are just making these conditions really inhumane, let's have this money go towards, the interview process and making this quicker for folks. The amount of people coming to the border is not going to be reduced anytime soon. So I think that our response needs to be totally overhauled. More bars, more chains, more barbed wire, more guns. That's not going to do it. That's not going to deter these people. And it wouldn't deter you or me either, if we were in their situation.
Yeah.
They're going to come and we need to process them quicker. We need to get them to safety quicker, because keeping them in this limbo is just, it's not fair.
Yeah. It seems like because we haven't really addressed American immigration policy and procedure in like 30 something years, there's this huge like gray zone, and there's a perverse incentive system set up as a result of the inefficiencies that we've self-created these, right? So like we're letting the cartels run amok. In many cases, people are fleeing these regions because the cartels exist, but that's another question. And then some people probably who could be legitimate asylum seekers, probably many people who could be, are saying, you know what, screw this, I'm just going to cross illegally, because they would rather do that than stay wherever they are and live that way. And so I'm sure that there's a nexus relating the two, and that could be
I
fixed.
think that all the time. Like, at what point would I, now that I have a daughter of my own, I see these people living in the tents for months after this like already super arduous journey. And I kind of think to myself, I'm like, how long would I wait? I don't know how long I personally would wait before crossing illegally, honestly. So, props to them for waiting it out for weeks and months and years. I don't know if I could do that. And that's the other thing, is all of these people that have made it this far were people of relative means, right? They are the ones with their, in their home countries, they were small business owners or professors or teachers or police officers, or they had houses and they had bank accounts, and now they're living in a tent. They're exactly like you or me. Honestly, we get a lot of volunteers within the asylum seeker community that volunteer with Solidarity Engineering, that are engineers from their home countries, that are construction foremen that help us with our construction projects, that are healthcare professionals, pharmacists, doctors, that, and it's crazy the amount of talent that is in these camps. So, yeah.
Yeah. Be better to bring them in and get them to be legal as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And I know I heard your vision a second ago for solidarity, which I like, which is like, I'd love for Solidaria to have nothing to do, which is awesome. But I fear, just thinking out loud for a second, I fear that there's going to be quite a bit of demand for the humanitarian work you do, because just zooming out, right? We've got climate migration, which we're just beginning to see the start of it. And it's forecasted to be like billions of people around the world are going to try to flee these climate exposed environments. And then we have failed states, which is a huge problem up and down the Western Hemisphere, but also elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then we have these conflict zones. I'm sure like these camps in Gaza have major water problems. I can't even imagine, probably especially more so now. And places around the world are probably going to need engineers like you with a heart who want to try to make some difference to the condition.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if I could dissolve solidarity engineering, all the problems are solved. But yeah, I'm not really seeing an end. Maybe at the border, if we rehaul our immigration policy, but then we would have the time and resources to maybe move to the Darien Gap, to Gaza. I was hoping to potentially do a project in Gaza, and then after hearing about the World Central Kitchen folks, I just, we work with World Central Kitchen at the border, and hearing about them just really put the kibosh on any further development of a solidarity engineering project there, which I think was the point of killing them, was to keep humanitarian aid organizations at bay, which sucks that we're kind of playing into that. But I could never put a solidarity engineering team at risk like that. But Ukraine, we've done a project. We've previously worked in Sierra Leone. We've had projects there. The border is just kind of our more like consistent project that is just like ongoing. But yeah, if we could move into more of a disaster response organization, which is what we kind of did in Guatemala. Guatemala, a region, was hit by there was a Category 4 and a Category 5 hurricane back in 2020, and we went down there as like a response. So that would be cool if we could like shift more into emergency response versus this kind of long-term refugee camp situation. But
yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of work to do on the emergency front just based on these climate things. Putting aside war for a second, just on the climate front, there's probably going to be a lot of these hurricanes and fires and whatnot, and famine, maybe even crop failures and things that we haven't thought about in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because right now, the border and like the Darien Gap and migration and what's happening in Gaza and Ukraine, these are just, they're man-made problems. And it's just so frustrating that, it's so avoidable.
Yeah. Well, Erin, this is a really fun, important conversation, and I'm appreciate all the work that you're doing and the time that you share with us. And I'll make sure that everyone listening gets links to your work, but also too, I'm going to link to I'm pretty sure it was an NPR podcast that you referenced about the border that got you interested in going down to help there in the first place. So
yeah, This American Life.
Yes, I'm going to link to that episode because I listened to it too. And it makes you think. It makes you think about the human side of all this. And so much so for you and your friends that you got inspired to go down and do something about it. So appreciate all the work you do. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.